Welcome to the Performance Around the Clock podcast. I am Professor Satchin Panda, a scientist in the field of circadian rhythm. In this podcast, I will talk to experts in many different fields about science, health, and human performance. You'll also find out why circadian rhythms is my favorite topic. I hope you enjoy the podcast and thank you for listening. Welcome to another episode of Performance Around the Clock, and I'm happy to be here with Dr. Courtney Peterson. And those who may not know, Courtney is actually one of the leading figures in research on nutrition, anything from caloric restriction, intermittent fasting, to even quality of diet. She's a professor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, which is also quite well known for nutrition research and also a lot of human research, including some of the very early studies on what extends lifespan or what extends health span, for example, exercise intervention. So in a way, she's actually in a very envious position in a place that is well known, has a long history of research into how to improve health and wellness of everybody. Welcome, Courtney.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so one thing, the first time I looked up your CV was when we were at a meeting in NIH. I guess it was in late December or early January. It was very cold outside, and being from San Diego, I was trying to figure out, okay, so I got to kill my time. So I was checking everybody's CV. One thing that caught my eyes, why somebody with an undergrad degree in physics and 4 master's degree, and that too, I think one is from Cambridge or Oxford or Harvard.
One's from Cambridge and one's from Imperial College London. Yeah.
Yes, I remember. So at least something is working in my brain.
Yeah.
And that really caught my eye. So can you tell us why a physicist?
Yeah. So I actually double majored in biology and physics as an undergrad and did minors in math and chemistry and knew I wanted to do something in science. Wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. And I liked basic science in biology, but I found out that over time I really liked physics better. And I was really interested in astrophysics and cosmology. Astrophysics and cosmology. So I saw the movie Contact in the 90s and loved it. Like probably one of my favorite movies of all time, seriously. So, but I wasn't certain what I wanted to do within physics when I first graduated college. So I ended up getting a Marshall Scholarship, going and doing a master's degree in applied math and theoretical physics at Cambridge University, and then a second degree actually in science writing. Because at the time I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a science writer, because I felt like some of the best science writers were actually hugely influential in the field. Completed both of those master's degrees, but then decided I definitely wanted to do a PhD in physics. Studied cosmology with Max Tegmark, who's a very famous cosmologist who appears on Nova.
Yeah.
And I studied a period in the early universe called inflation, which is when we think the universe was expanding outwards faster than the speed of light. So this period happened less than a second after the Big Bang. And for my PhD, I was actually creating and testing different models of inflation to predict actually what was happening during this time period in the universe. And I realized 99.99% of all the models people were working on were going to be wrong. And this was the time that Steve Jobs was going around giving talks, graduation commencement speeches, saying, if he looked at himself in the mirror too many days in a row and asked himself, if I were to die tomorrow, I would be happy with what I was doing today, then he would change course if he couldn't say yes. And so my sort of reincarnation of that was, if I got to the end of my career 30 years from now and I failed at whatever that was, would I be happy that I took the risk? And I couldn't say that in physics. I'd only be happy if I succeeded. And so I thought about what else I could be really passionate about, and nutrition was definitely one of the areas. And I was really excited about that. And during my PhD, I'd actually in 2008 heard a podcast about intermittent fasting. And this was the early days of podcasts. So this was Mark Mattson's study where they had people eat one meal a day. and fast for 20 hours a day. And I thought, that is one of the most, not quite bizarre, but extreme things that I've heard. And it sounds really interesting. And this was 2008. And a couple years later, I started experimenting with it. We didn't have the word time-restricted eating at the time. And I started thinking, fasting is so powerful, but what would actually be sustainable for people to do long-term over the course of their career? So that year, about a year before I got my PhD in physics, I started looking at opportunities in nutrition of all places, because I thought food is so powerful as medicine. Yeah. And I think you and I share this kind of passion, like lifestyle medicine. And so I ended up getting a postdoc actually at Pennington Biomedical Research Center with Eric Ravison, who was one of the first people to do clinical trials on intermittent fasting in humans. So that's how I eventually landed on the path that I'm at, and he was willing to take a risk on me as a physicist, and everything has fortunately worked out great. So.
No, that's actually very interesting that Eric took the risk, because there are many, there are many PIs. We get, as PI, you get a lot of applications from many different people. And sometimes we take students who come from very different background. And then at the same time, we have to make a call.
Right.
And what is interesting, I did not know about your work on science writing, because what I find every time I listen to your talk, I'm like, wow, she's so lucid, so precise in communicating. Today you gave a nice history of caloric restriction and intermittent fasting, 100 years of history packed into 20 minutes. But for all the listeners, if you ever get a chance of Courtney giving a scientific presentation, don't miss the chance.
Thank you. I appreciate
this is
that.
Also an opportunity to learn how to pack a lot of wisdom into 15, 20 minutes of presentation.
Yeah. Thank you.
So going back to your interest, so you started with intermittent fasting or 1 meal a day. So I remember when we published our first paper, Mark Matson sent me an email saying, well, we have been doing this for a while.
I can see that. Yeah.
And here is the list of papers.
Right.
So when you got to Pennington, which is kind of the Rome of nutrition studies.
Yes.
That's the
largest nutrition and obesity research center in the United States.
Yeah.
Although many people have not heard of it yet.
Yeah, a lot of people. Means when I was doing other studies, I had no idea what is Pennington Biomedical Research, and then after I started in nutrition, I realized how influential this particular center was.
Yes.
So by the time you got to Pennington, you already had the idea to do some form of fasting study.
Correct. I was interested in two broad areas. One is diet quality, and I was really interested in food groups, which I know is a very classic question, but most of what we know about food groups comes from epidemiologic studies rather than randomized control trials. And I knew I wanted to do daily intermittent fasting, but as you know, at the time, the word time-restricted eating didn't exist.
Yeah. And then that was a beautiful study that you did with 6 hours time-restricted eating, where can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you and also what it took to do this? Because there are some details about that study. No other time-restricted eating study has done that. So
absolutely. So about 9 months into my postdoc, your seminal paper on time-restricted eating came out, which was, you probably don't know this, but it was pivotal in me getting my first grant to study intermittent fasting, because we had a pilot grant competition at the center. And I put in a grant saying and it was for translational studies. And I was saying this is fantastic work by Satchin Panda. At the time, I didn't know you. And I said, we have to do this in humans. And I'm going to roast Eric Ravison a little bit, but he was my postdoc mentor. And I showed him the study and I said, I was so excited about it. And he said, I don't believe it will work in humans. And so I applied for a grant, and actually I ended up getting it, which was fantastic. And what I really wanted to do was to see if there were any benefits to intermittent fasting independent of weight loss. And I was also interested in trying to maximize the benefits of intermittent fasting, which is now known as time-restricted, or at least daily intermittent fasting, which is now known as time-restricted eating in humans. And so I wanted to put that eating window early in the day. And I forget how I knew at the time, but I had really just by pure chance accidentally stumbled across circadian rhythms back at a time where almost no one outside of science knew about circadian rhythms. But I had read some sort of influential ebook. I mean, I'm going to embarrass myself here, in alternative health circles, about how it's really important to get bright light in the morning. And this was,
Yeah. 2010,
15 years ago, right? Yeah. And I had started to notice that my digestion, or I could eat larger meals earlier in the day. So I was just starting to put a couple things together with, eating earlier in the day and getting bright light. And I thought, well, why don't we put that eating period early in the day to be in alignment with these circadian rhythms? And I don't know how I picked a 6-hour period anymore. But what we decided to do was to take men with prediabetes. And we were going to randomize them to try 2 different eating schedules. One was a 6-hour time-restricted eating protocol where they would actually finish eating. Everyone would be done eating by 3 p.m., so definitely on the extreme end, and compare that to eating over a 12-hour period, which is roughly the median daily eating duration in people if you don't account for,
snacks and other stuff.
Yeah, or maybe not snacks, but if you just look at NHANES data, right? If you don't look at, variation from day to day, because I know you often define it differently. And so I wanted to do this study in energy balance, meaning so that participants don't gain or lose weight, because I wanted to know whether there are benefits independent of weight loss. And the reason for the 6 hours was, again, I wasn't trying to do something that would translate into people yet. I just wanted to know, is there an effect, right? Can we see it? So let's maximize the difference. And I'd say to date, I think that study still kind of stands the test of the time as one of the largest differences in fasting duration between the control group and the intervention group at 6 hours.
Yeah.
And if you look at the literature today, a lot of the studies that do report benefits tend to have like 4-hour differences. 3 hours, 4 hours at least between groups, 5 hours.
4 hours is kind of when you begin to see differences. But actually,
yes.
Yeah, coming back to your study, actually, when I read the manuscript, because I think you presented I don't think you presented some data, but you said that you were recruiting. And then when the paper came out, I realized, okay, so this is a physicist doing the experiment because they're calorie balanced.
Oh yeah, and everything was so precise. So so I did what's called a controlled feeding study.
Yeah.
These are back-breaking studies. I can only do so many at a time because they make you want to stop doing these studies, but they're absolutely wonderful when they work. And so what that means is you weigh all food to less than a gram, and you sit there and you watch your participants eat all the food to make sure that they've licked every last crumb off the inside of everything. They've scraped every little piece of like salad dressing off of everything, because you're trying to perfectly metabolically tailor these meals so that they maintain their weight. So I can't count how many meals I watched. I mean, it must have been over 500. And we screened over 10,000 people to have 8 completers for this study.
10,000 people.
Because these participants had to come in and eat their meals every day at the center, or they had to video record themselves at home. So one of the big challenges, one, finding people with prediabetes and impaired glucose tolerance, which, at the time was a challenge. And then second, people just willing to run with a really demanding study. But, it paid off. We ended up finding that at the end of 5 weeks, that participants who did time-restricted eating by eating in a 6-hour period early in the day, they had about a 24% reduction in insulin resistance in only 5 weeks. They also had about a 14% increase in beta cell responsiveness, which is the ability of the beta cell to produce insulin in response to rising glucose levels. They also, in our study, they had 10 to 11 point drops in systolic and diastolic blood pressure, which I find absolutely staggering. I never expected effects that large. Now, most of our participants technically had hypertension, but we weren't thinking about the study from a hypertension perspective. And we found small but important differences in oxidative stress. I think it was about a 13 or 14% improvement in oxidative stress. We didn't find any favorable changes in cholesterol or lipid levels, and no changes really in inflammatory markers.
But I vaguely remember your cholesterol and lipid levels are almost controlled, like they were in healthy range. We see only in some cases where the cholesterol is too off. then they see improvement. Otherwise, they're okay. They don't see. We don't see too
much improvement. Yeah.
But I remember, like, there was a beautiful study where you went really deep, and then I saw the math and physics aspect of you coming in.
Yeah, we tend to be pretty anal as physicists.
No, it's exactly. This is absolutely necessary because there are some nutrition studies. These are done to a less rigor, I would say, and then but these rigorous studies, they actually stand the test of time.
Exactly. Yeah.
And another thing was, for just like Eric's comments that it may not work in humans, I also got that same comment for almost 2-3 years.
Yeah, I got a lot of comments too.
I stopped going to conferences for a year because I thought, okay, I can't take it.
Yeah, and I'll say one anecdote for our younger viewers. I had submitted career development awards at that time, and I remember one score I got on my application was an 8.
Yeah.
And the reviewer's comment was, "You will never make a career in time-restricted eating." And so I can laugh about it now, but you kind of have to have the fortitude to pursue things that are hard but will make a big difference, is I think the message.
I think, I'm not sure whether my guess is right. I think when you started this study, you had already done it on yourself.
Of course. I started in 2010. Yeah, I started experimenting. Yeah.
This is something that I've seen so many researchers that do it on themselves, and they realize there is some benefit, and that actually makes them, okay, I believe in this, and I'll get it done.
Yeah.
And I see that starting from the mouse experiment, Christopher, who did this study, who started this study, he did it on himself, and he was, he was going to gym, he was well built, but still he wanted to see it, and then he did it. Emily does it until this age, even during her pregnancy. Of course, she did not do 8 hours, but she was doing. So this is something that we are seeing that a lot of people try, because there is nothing too much to lose.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's easy and free. I mean, one of the things I think so attractive about time-restricted eating is it's accessible to pretty much everyone. Yeah. It's actually really easy to learn. So I'm involved in a 2-site clinical trial right now where we're testing calorie restriction versus time-restricted eating for slowing the aging process. And when we were first setting up this study, Corby Martin, who's one of the co-PIs of that study, was kind of shocked that we give so little counseling, which isn't to say we actually provide a lot of support in my studies, but the development of materials to explain what it is and how to do it is actually pretty minimal. A lot of our actual counseling is just encouraging people to work out schedule kinks or, trying to motivate them. But it's so much easier than telling people to go eat broccoli and, monitor your meat consumption to make sure it's lean meat. And, you give them like 10 rules and they're lost, or it takes a while to,
But in our study, what we find is at least some, I cannot say everybody, when they try to do 10 hours or 8 hours time restricting, after a while, they experience something that say that their salt bliss point or sugar bliss point has gone down, so they cannot eat too much sugary food, or they cannot eat too much salty food. So it's an indirect benefit on improving diet quality. And also in our study, what we find is those who used to snack too much, since they're going through 14 hours of fasting, 16 hours, they eat a big breakfast. And then they reduce snacking. Have you looked at any of this data in your study? Yeah,
we've generally, I would say, roughly steered people away from skipping meals, which may or may not be part of our success. We've generally counseled people to take the same meals and condense them into a shorter period. That said, participants are always free to do whatever they want. Yeah, so we find some people skip their meals, but probably more than half don't. They just squeeze it into a smaller time frame, and there are 2 reasons for that, why that may be helpful. So one, I think conceptually it's easier for people to think like, oh, I'm just taking the same portions. I don't have to like redesign a whole day's worth of menus. And then the second reason is, there may be some benefit to still having maybe at least 3 meals a day from a protein consumption perspective. So
I'm saying that they're not skipping meals. What they do is they reduce the snacking.
Snacking outside.
Meals. And also And again, it's small proportion of people because since we use the app to collect all their food that we can see, and then we ask them, since they eat a bigger breakfast,
Yes.
they're not hungry for another snack before lunch.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's what we see.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is interesting that
Yes.
that's why I was curious
Yeah.
to see whether we can combine maybe
Yes.
improved quality of diet
Right.
with time-restricted eating, because in mice we see that huge benefit that muscle
Yes.
stays stronger into late age. Anything going on with quality of nutrition? Because you said that your initial love was with nutrition quality.
Yes, we don't have any studies right now that combine intermittent fasting with changes in diet quality. We are starting to see in the literature that some people are doing that, particularly either with ketogenic diets or Mediterranean diets. My lab hasn't started in that area. We are in other areas. We've started testing high doses of certain food groups in patients with type 2 diabetes. So our current study in that area, we've given patients with type 2 diabetes very large amounts of whole fruit to see how it affects their blood sugar level. Does it get better or does it get worse? And we're currently analyzing that data.
What type of fruits?
All types. We tried not to deliberately pick low glycemic index fruits, which I know are all the rage, but we wanted to design a menu that's typical of what the average American would eat. So it includes things like bananas and pineapples, which have higher glycemic indexes. So it's a combination.
No, that'll be really good because, bananas and pineapple have gotten really bad these days. It's like
exactly.
Nobody wants to eat a banana anymore.
Yeah, but we give the participants, most days there's probably a berry or a stone fruit in there. Like cherries, blueberries, peaches, or mangoes.
But the thing is, if you look at bananas, they are not as bad as a muffin or some of the fast foods.
Yes.
And if it fills your belly and then you are craving less for some of these sugary snacks, then it's much better. So people kind of forget that sometimes in the pursuit of perfection, we forget what is good for now.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And then in terms of, so now both of us were attending this aging conference.
Yes.
And you mentioned that some of the effects of, we know that caloric restriction delays age-related diseases and also increases lifespan.
Right.
Are you planning to measure some of the aging hallmarks of aging in any of your studies?
Absolutely. So what Satchin's alluding to. So I'm part of a 2-site clinical study called the DIAL Health Study. Pennington Biomedical Research Center with Leanne Redmond and Corby Martin, they're the lead PIs on the study. And this grant is done in partnership with the NIA. And we are taking midlife adults, so adults 25 through 49, and we're randomizing them. I'm going to give you a kind of simplified version of the intervention. But roughly, they're technically 5 groups, but they're 3 broad interventions, which is one is roughly weight stability, control group doesn't do anything. The second intervention is time-restricted eating, 8-hour window ending by 6. But quasi-self, I call those quasi-self-selected windows. And then the third is 25% CR. So, and we're following participants for 6 months. Primary things we're looking at are adherence and feasibility. We know roughly what adherence to CR looks like at 6 months. It's roughly about 80% adherence, meaning if you prescribe 25%, participants hit about 20% CR. If you prescribe 25% CR over 2 years, unfortunately, they hit half that, right? So sustainability is a huge issue with CR. That said, there are a lot of benefits to CR, even with the lower adherence levels. So main thing we're looking at in this study is, feasibility, right? Secondary things we're looking at are clinical cardiometabolic outcomes. So things like 24-hour glucose levels, muscle mass, bone mass, blood pressure, heart rate, cholesterol levels.
Kidney function.
Yeah, kidney functions in there. There's a marker of kidney function. Yep. And then we're looking at a ton of molecular markers. So when we started the study, it was I think it was the 8 or 9 hallmarks of aging, depending on which paper you were referring. We're now up to 12 hallmarks of aging. Yeah. And these include things like gut microbe dysbiosis, senescent cells, telomere attrition, just to give you all a flavor. Nutrient sensing pathways. Let's see how many I can name. Nutrient sensing pathways, mitochondrial function, stem cell number, and there are probably 4 or 5 others I'm missing, but that's pretty good. But we are looking at representative markers from each of these classes. And one of the exciting things we're looking at is biological age. So biological age is how young or old your cells and bodies and tissues function, which can be the same as your chronological age, or it can be younger or older than that. And in the field, there have been these epigenetic clocks that have been developed. So based on basically DNA methylation patterns, there are a bunch of different clocks. So we will actually be measuring biological age by looking at DNA methylation patterns in PBMCs, actually, of all cell types. And as I mentioned in my talk today, Walter Longo has done the first sort of analysis of whether intermittent fasting can actually reduce biological age with the fasting mimicking diet. And he has found that it reduces biological age by about 2.5 years after 3 cycles of doing a fasting mimicking diet. So in a fasting mimicking diet, you reduce energy intake to about roughly the equivalent of about a meal per day for 5 days in a row. So, and you repeat that 3 times. So we will be comparing that for time restricted eating versus calorie restriction. My guess is that calorie restriction may be still slightly more effective at slowing the aging process. But the reason why I don't think that's the end of the story is I think very, very few people are willing to do calorie restriction. And so I think what we're going to end up finding is that time-restricted eating probably has most of the same benefits, albeit to a lesser degree. In some cases, might actually have more benefits than CR.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
But we'll see. And other people might hypothesize differently. But I think we're going to get most, but perhaps not all, the same benefits of TRE. But I think with TRE, as opposed to CR, I mean, in our studies, and I think similar to your studies, I mean, TRE basically induces a mild CR of about like 8 to 10%, depending on the study, if you do the math. And but I don't think it has the deleterious effects that CR has, or at least trying to achieve 25% CR, which, so one of the, I think, really surprising, well, I think it's somewhat surprising aspects of CR is bone mass decreases even once you kind of hit your weight loss plateau. Yeah. So even once participants who have been on CR for a long time, they continue to maintain their weight, bone mass continues to go down. Yeah. And so I don't think that's a positive finding. Now, I know not everyone in the CR community is worried about that, but it certainly gives me pause. Plus, it's just really challenging for people to stick with.
Yeah. No, actually, I went back to the original data from CR.
Oh, okay.
Calorie 2. But I have a slightly different take on the outcome.
Yeah, please.
Because when you look at drug trials, so I always compare the cancer trials, because the cancer trials are the most expensive ones and all that stuff. The best cancer drugs, immunotherapies, the benefit, depending on an average, the benefit 1 out of 5 people who take it.
Okay. Oh, you're looking at number needed to treat, or?
No. So, because they're pre-selected in a way in the original clinical trial, and then the endpoints were done in such a way that the best immunotherapy is, I was actually looking at liver cancer, head and neck cancer, the neck and throat, that kind of cancer, around 1 in 5. Okay. So now let's go back to calorie, and then people always throw these numbers that they were asked to do 25%, but on an average they did 12%. Right. Now, if you ask, what did the top quartile do? Like the top 25%, they actually reduced their calories by 20% and maintained for 22 years. Okay. And it will be interesting to see whether those ones got many of the benefits of caloric restriction. And these days, what I feel is many of us are healthy because we eat less than other people. So,
Maybe.
so calorie restriction,
Yes,
although
Yeah.
we kind of in our
Right.
we in our hidden mind, we're actually doing the calorie counting math in some ways or the other.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And on time restricted, yes, the bone loss is a very big thing because once you lose bone, there is no building back on bone.
Very
It's
difficult.
very difficult. I've never seen anyone above the age of 50.
Yeah.
Maybe after 30, between 30 and 50, maybe to some extent, but after 50, it's very hard.
Yeah.
Like when you say very hard, it's maybe 10 out of 100 will try and get a little bit of increase. So that's why the bone health
Yes.
is really important because even I say that there are 4 major classes of disease and one is injury
Right.
that
Yes.
affect our longevity.
Yes.
And we don't talk about whether an intervention will improve our joint health and bone health.
Right.
And joint is okay because you can actually replace joint to some extent, but then once you break a bone, and I have seen so many older individuals who break a bone and then health goes down.
Yeah,
And within
absolutely.
X number of years. And actually NIA had some data that if somebody has a major fall after the age of 70, then the chance of dying in the next 5 years is very high.
Yeah,
So
I've
the bone
seen
health
those stats too. Yeah.
So that's why I'm more and more interested in saying, can we combine time restricted eating with something that will improve our bone health, our joint health, or maybe combining that with, say, Mediterranean diet that is known to have many benefits, or plant-based diet. So those will be I think, the next waves.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I noticed you mentioned cancer. We also have a clinical trial in my lab in cancer patients, so rectal and breast cancer patients. So this is also a 2-site clinical trial with Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. And for that study, it's really interesting because we're talking a little bit about long-term adherence. We find that during cancer treatment, it's actually really hard to stick to any diet.
Yeah.
But time-restricted eating may be a little bit easier. But in this particular clinical trial, we are testing time-restricted eating versus usual eating habits, and we're testing something called the differential stress sensitization theory, which is roughly this theory. I'm going to simplify it, but that when you fast healthy cells, you're depriving them of glucose and growth factors, and so they sort of upregulate stress defenses. So then if there's any sort of cytotoxic insult like chemotherapy and radiation, those cells have already upregulated their stress defenses, so they actually end up dying at a lower rate. But conversely, with cancer cells, if you fast them, because they have oncogenic mutations, they can't access the same sort of stress resilience pathways, and instead they have to shift their substrate oxidation, and they end up generating more free radicals. You get like an anti-Warburg type effect. And so they actually end up dying at a higher rate when subject to chemotherapy and radiation. So we're testing that in this particular study, which is really neat.
Outcome?
So 2 main outcomes are adverse events from treatment, chemotherapy, and radiation. So our hypothesis is that time-restricted eating will reduce the amount of side effects from chemotherapy and radiation. And then the other outcome is something called the pathologic complete response rate. And basically that's the number of people who by the end of treatment no longer have a tumor.
Okay.
So it's basically a proxy of like, did the tumor vanish during the treatment period? What's super cool about this study is we are doing this in rectal and breast cancer patients in what's called the neoadjuvant setting. And what that essentially means is that patients get treatment for a while before they go into surgery. So then we can take tumor tissue both before and after treatment to see like what's happening in terms of cell growth and cell proliferation. And in this particular grant that's funded by NCI, we couldn't pick a lot of biomarkers, but we will have these very precious specimens. But we picked 5 biomarkers, including markers of apoptosis, autophagy, and cell proliferation to see also what's going on with cell growth and depth dynamics, which I think is another really interesting aspect of TRE that just really hasn't been studied much in humans. In humans, yeah. With the important caveat being in humans.
No, because there are now 2 or 3 studies in mice showing that time-restricted eating reduces the tumor burden in breast cancer and then liver cancer and a few other cancers.
Yeah, and all those studies that I've seen, at least of TRE, they've all been favorable with cancer outcomes. So
the cancer actually, it will be hugely important because even reducing adverse side effect during treatment, during chemo, is a huge thing.
Yes, and then there's something too, it doesn't get talked a lot about, of chemo brain.
Yeah,
with
chemo fog.
chemo fog. Yep. So with brain fog, and there are issues with energy levels being low and things like that. And with Mark Mattson's study recently, which I think was a tour de force, where they found that the 5-2 diet actually improved cognitive function. And they even had markers of neuronal insulin resistance. So very clever study design using extra, it's the ESVs, extra, I'm forgetting what the abbreviation. It's the vesicles. But brain-derived ones, and measuring insulin signaling markers in that. So very cool. And then they also found improvements in short and long-term recall.
Yeah, so I think this TRE studies in human, particularly cancer patients, will be the next way, because I know Amber Kleckner from Rochester, she just got funded by NIH or NCI to look at the effect of TRE in cancer patients. And then I think it's the Huntsman Cancer Center. Sorry, the
Hutchinson?
No, the University of Utah.
Utah, I don't know.
So they do have 2 or 3 studies on TRE and cancer. And I think that's cervical cancer and something else. So I think that's where what will be interesting is meal replacement, because many cancer patients, they're going through so much, they're handling so many things that the last thing they want to do is to cook food or eat healthy in a mindful way. So my dream is actually we actually wrote a protocol for glioblastoma patients, because glioblastoma patients, they go through at least in San Diego, they go through a 7 weeks chemo treatment cycle after surgery, and then we are thinking whether we can do that. But then as you know, it needs a huge amount of logistics, and we don't have the. So that's why being at a place like UAB or Pennington really helps, because I don't know, when I was not doing clinical studies, I was thinking that, well, any university, you can just I can buy some mice from Jack's and do some experiments, you can do that. But now I'm realizing that how important it is to have the clinical infrastructure to recruit patients. Like when you said you screened 10,000 patients.
Oh, yeah.
To get
I think it was 1,000, not 10.
1,000. Okay.
Or at least I meant to say 1,000.
So 1,000 to.
But still, I mean, that's staggering. Yeah.
It means you are looking at their medical record, and then you're going through all the check mark to see who qualifies or not, and then so
it's hard. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why these studies are extremely important. And even if these studies, sometimes people say, well, this study has only 100 people. Well, if you look back, those initial hundreds people studies actually changed the life of 100,000 people. I don't know, the original metformin study must have been 200 or 500 people.
Possibly, yes. Also, the other thing would help too is if R01 pay lines were increased into NIH. But I know what you mean, right? Because we always try to do the larger sample size with the budget we have. So, but sometimes, part of the beauty of some of these studies is when you control things really well, or there's a large and important effect like TRE, you can see these effects at lower sample sizes too. So.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think the lifestyle intervention studies are tougher than the drug studies.
Yeah, I do too.
Because drug is you give them a pill or you give them an injection every 7 days, where they have to come and get the injection, like GLP-1 receptor agonist.
Yes.
And there are now ways that you can even coat the drug with a tiny sensor. You know that the people actually took the drug.
Absolutely. And I have to, for a nutrition study, for instance, I have to hire usually double the staff because for every coordinator, I have to hire a dietitian to provide counseling and to collect and analyze food records. And you pretty much can't get a grant funded without food records.
So these are very expensive studies.
They're very expensive. They're hard to run. Yeah.
But it's really cool that you coming from physics.
Yes. Made the switch.
Is making this switch. So going back to that question that inspired you, can you look into the mirror? Yeah. And I'm sure that you can say that your life has been fruitful, because you have published now quite a few dietary intervention studies. Those are very solid. Those results are really reproduced in multiple
Yes.
hands.
Yes.
So what's next?
Yeah, so a couple things. So yes, I can say that I'm glad I took the risk. I'm a big risk taker, I think, like you are too. So one study we have that I should definitely mention with viewers' interest in circadian rhythms is we have a neat study in patients with type 2 diabetes where we're testing actually the combination of time-restricted eating with bright light therapy. So we're trying to, and in this particular study, it's actually funded by the Department of Defense. And the study is in just over 300 adults with type 2 diabetes. And we are combining the interventions in what's called a 2-by-2 study design. And what that means is you test all possible combinations of yes light, no light, yes time-restricted eating, no time-restricted eating. So one group doesn't change what they're doing. The second group does time-restricted eating. The third group gets bright light therapy. In our study, it's 90 minutes a day of additional bright light therapy. And we have wearable glasses that shine blue wavelengths of light in your eye. And then the fourth group does both. And what's interesting in patients with type 2 diabetes, so going back to the circadian rhythm sort of angle, data is conflicting about their central clock rhythm. Phase doesn't seem to be much of a problem, but some studies report shockingly low melatonin levels at night. Other studies don't, but could be circadian disruption of the central circadian rhythm there. Peripheral rhythms are very different. So there's not a lot of data on this, but some people know that, if you have type 2 diabetes, your blood sugar control is not very good in the morning. And in fact, a lot of patients won't eat in the morning for that reason. And there was a bunch of really elegant work done in China in the 90s showing that insulin sensitivity in patients with type 2 diabetes actually peaks in the evening around 7 p.m. And so this suggests that those peripheral clocks are misaligned, and it's not by a small amount. It's by a huge amount, because in patients with what we call normal glycemia, which means normal glucose levels, it's in the morning. So this is like an 8-hour, 9-hour difference. It's like shockingly large. And so one of the hypotheses of this particular study is if we get them to do time-restricted eating early in the day, the time-restricted eating component should improve the amplitude and also a little bit the phase of the rhythms, and then eating earlier in the day should also improve the phase of the rhythms. So the thinking is that those peripheral clocks will shift towards having better insulin sensitivity in the morning, and that will drive improvements in glycemic control.
So when you say early, how early?
In this study, it's within...
Not 3 p.m. dinner.
It's within 2 hours of waking up. They have to start. It's relative to when they wake
within 2 hours of waking up, you start eating.
Correct.
And then count 8 hours.
And then count 8 hours, yeah. It's still pretty early, but we want to see if we can improve people's health, right? Yeah. So this is a cool study where we're bringing people inpatient to the hospital, and we're measuring their blood sugar levels through an IV 36 times in a 24-hour period. We're measuring glucose, insulin, C-peptide. We have 24-hour blood pressure measurements, polysomnography to measure sleep, and so forth. And then the angle on bright light therapy, as you know, that should improve the health of the central circadian rhythm. And we would expect there to be more melatonin production at night, better sleep. And there have been a small number of studies out of Siberia, I don't know if you've come across them, that have found that using bright light therapy modestly reduces appetite and decreases fat mass. So we'll see if there are any improvements in body weight. There may not be, but we'll see. So, and we definitely know bright light therapy improves mood in a lot of people too. So we'll see what the benefits are. And one of the sub-hypotheses is people with circadian rhythm disruption will experience the greatest improvement. But as I think it was your 2019 paper showed, that time-restricted eating has benefits even if you knock out certain circadian clock genes.
Certain genes,
Yeah, exactly.
So long. The bright light therapy. What time?
Great question. So I feel like there's very little good data on optimal bright light exposure to improve at least cardiometabolic health. What I put together for this study is they need at least 30 minutes of light exposure starting no later than an hour after waking up. And that's based on looking at the phase response curve where you see kind of like maximum phase shifting within roughly 2 hours of waking up. Yeah.
It's really music to my ear that somebody non-circadian person used the word phase response curve.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, you got to look at. I mean, that's very informative for how you would design a light intervention. And I mean, this is not perfect science, but then we say you have to get an additional 60 minutes any time of your choice before 3 p.m. And so in that again, it's looking at that phase response curve, like when you start seeing phase shifting effects. So we'll see. And I know there's like a broad recommendation of at least an hour a day. I often wonder if it should be more than that.
It is
of
more than
outdoor
that.
exposure.
Actually,
Yes.
the recommendation is at least.
At least.
At least.
But I wonder if it should be at least even
2
more
hours
than that.
Because
Yes.
actually there was a study with Horacio de la Iglesia, who is a professor here in Seattle, and what he found among college students, those who get 2 hours of bright light during daytime, their nighttime melatonin is high.
Yes.
And this follows what has been seen in laboratory conditions. So starting from I think between 2004 and 2008, I don't remember when exactly, there are 2 papers where these individuals are given 5,000 lux of light throughout the day because it was a controlled study. And they had a boost in melatonin at nighttime.
Yes.
And then I think another study did 2 or 3 hours of 5,000 lux. So the bottom line is yes, if you have more light, then it's better. And since you are in the south where
we get a lot of light, actually.
You get a lot of light. So then the worry is if they go sit in the sun for 2 hours. So you don't want that. You want them even in the shade, they're getting 10,000 lux of light. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of my inspiration for 90 minutes was a month-long study where they did 4 hours of light exposure a day in elderly insomniacs. And at the end of 1 month, they doubled their melatonin levels. So very impressive. But in general, long-term. So I am excited about this study. I think it'll be huge. But I'm definitely still excited about aging and trying to understand like what happens over a 24-hour cycle in response to time-restricted eating. So you can tell I love inpatient studies. And then at some point, I think it'll, be important to do even larger clinical trials on TRE. And I don't know if that's like DPP-like.
Yeah, I think we should talk about that to see DPP-like because
at some point, because we have the meta-analyses now. Now, most people don't know. I find a lot of people when they talk to me, they often come in with their biases. Either TRE is the best thing since sliced bread, or it's terrible. And didn't you see this one study where it refuted everything? But if you actually look at the individual studies, it's something like at least 3/4 or 80% of TRE studies testing 8-hour windows find an improvement in weight loss. And meta-analyses show that can now consistently show that TRE reduces body weight. So I think we're ready for the kind of study, or will be in the next few years, for the kind of study that would set, hopefully, national dietary guidelines.
Yeah, because I think in the early days of TRE, the protocol was not well established. Even some patients just said, okay, so go try 8 hours. And there was no monitoring. And I think protocols are improving. And so at one point, I was actually, I have been always telling Lisa Chow and Blandine, who are my collaborators, we should do a DPP style because Blandine was part of DPP.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so we should do something like DPP. And I would love to collaborate with you.
Absolutely. And I will say, when I last talked to some program officials at NHLBI, they're certainly interested, but one of the things they want to see is perhaps a little more research so we can, because what the big challenge will be harmonizing the protocol. There's so many ways you could design the study, and people might be like, what do you mean? But like, how do you pick the eating window? Is it relative to sleep time or clock time? Like, what's the sort of difference in the fasting duration you want between the 2 groups? Do you require the control group to eat over 12 hours or longer? What if that changes their eating habits? Or do you just say habitual eating habits? And I think these study design decisions matter. And what do you tell participants, to lose weight or not lose weight? And a lot of the studies combining TRE with CR, and we had this same challenge in one of our studies, it's harder to see an effect if you're putting it on a background of weight loss where you're already telling people.
And also in mice, we have seen that there is no difference if you look at just outside the health span or lifespan in mice. even in Joe Takahashi's paper, there is not
Yes.
much difference that you see.
Yes.
So I guess this is an exciting idea, and we should
Yes.
definitely
Yes.
collaborate. And I'm also liking your idea that now you are
Yes.
moving towards right after waking up,
Yes.
start your breakfast at X time and then count
Yeah.
time instead of clock time.
Yes.
And yeah, so I would love to collaborate
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
get some really
Yeah.
hard stuff, because another thing with the app that we are finding is once they get trained on the app, they actually stay on the app. So people always say that, well, app is so difficult, but then our compliance is pretty high, and then 2 or 3 times in a week we check on all the participants, and if somebody is logging less, then we just make a simple. And now we have actually used some automated messaging. People can call this AI, but actually it's pretty simple. But it sends notification and it's compliant. So now I think we have run almost 12 or 13 different studies. And then the nice thing is, from all these studies we have eating time and also CGM data and activity data. So in that way, I think we can put together all our results to make a convincing case that we should do a.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So that's exciting.
Absolutely. Yes.
And
Great.
then I can.
And I'm also interested in cardiovascular disease, but I have not quite yet how to figure out how to get that funded, because NHLBI has more mechanistic R1s.
Yeah.
But I'm toying around with how to get something funded while still going a mechanistic route that has like a combination of clinical and mechanistic outcomes. So
Yeah.
also toying around with that, but we'll see where I head.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, the number one cause for death or disability is the heart.
Yeah, exactly.
I always say that the heart is at the heart of our health.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have to figure out how to protect the heart.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Courtney. And this was really exciting. This was refreshing to sit down with you after so many years. And, and hopefully we can plan this collaboration and then pitch to NIH to see how to do a long-term study, because that will really change the guideline. And I always say that somebody had told me, actually, Joanne Corey, who unfortunately passed away a couple of days ago after fighting Parkinson's disease for 20 years. Her message was very simple. If you can summarize your work in one sentence or one word, then you have done it. And similarly, like you said, if we can change the national dietary guideline to have timing as one of the component, then you have surpassed what you aimed for.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I think that is the long-term goal. Yeah. And the interest is there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Courtney.
All right. Thank
Have a wonderful
you.
day. And
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to our collaboration.
Yeah.